Delia. Talk about changing the trajectory of one's life. You guys are in for a treat tonight. 6 years ago, my story took off, and I don't know how it did, other than it was just this thing right here. And I didn't mean for it to, but I made some comments about what was going on in our industry, and a gentleman contacted me, the very first guy, a journalist that I had heard of through Bill Bullard, but really didn't know much about. And he called me and he says, "Hey, you've got some strong words to say. Would you come on my podcast?" And I said, "Well, what's a podcast?" And he says, "Well, I just want to interview you." And I said, "Yeah, let's do it." And enter Alex Newman, an American hero in my book all day long, constitutionalist, the smartest man I've ever met, bar none, great leader, family man, Christian, author, teacher, speaker, you name it, he is that. And we're going to have him come up and speak. Please welcome American hero Alex Newman. Is he here? There he is.
Thank you, brother. Appreciate that. Thank you for the kind introduction. Love you too. Thank you guys all for being here. It's a tremendous honor. Thank you, Shad. I can't say how much I appreciate all that you guys are doing. Not just to feed us. I mean, that's kind of important. We like to eat. But also to defend our freedom. So it's a great honor to be here with you guys. I'm very grateful for all the work that you do. And I'm very grateful to have the opportunity to share a little bit with you. One of the things I get to do almost every year is go somewhere exotic in the world to find out what the United Nations is up to. And it's unbelievable. And I just want to take a picture of it all, take a video of it all, and show the people in America what is going on, because people would not believe how nutty this stuff is. So it's going to change all of our lives if we don't put a stop to this. But you guys in particular have a big bullseye on your backs. So the latest UN report is pretty alarming. Turns out global warming is actually worse than predicted, which is pretty bad because it was already going to destroy the world. So, I mean, I don't know what else is going to happen here, but it's going to get bad. But on the bright side, the UN's latest reports and scientific models say we now have 10 years until global warming kills us all and destroys the planet, rather than 5 years. So we're doing better every day, praise the Lord. But if you pay enough taxes to the UN, they promise you the weather is going to be really nice 100 years from now. Okay? This is the stuff that they expect us to believe. Okay? It's absolutely bonkers. And most Americans don't believe it. I'm very grateful for that. But a lot of us do, and a lot of people around the world do. So it's like a doomsday cult. And you probably remember the COVID stuff from just a few years ago. Well, that is seamlessly transitioning now into the next crisis, which is CO2. And this is what they themselves are saying. This is the fakest of all the fake news networks, CNN. They've got a secret camera here on one of the producers talking about we're moving away from the COVID crisis into the climate crisis. Listen.
There's just like a COVID fatigue, so like whenever a new story comes up, they're going to latch onto it. They've already announced in our office that once the public will be open to it, we're going to start focusing mainly on climate.
So climate and global warming, right? Some of you guys recognize this guy. He was just wheeled off stage left from the World Economic Forum, or the World Economic Forum, as he likes to call it. And I'm telling you, we're moving from COVID to climate change.
We know now that the next crisis is already waiting for us around the corner, and it is the climate crisis.
Yes, the climate crisis is going to get you unless you pay taxes to the UN.
We are on a fast track.
This is the Secretary General of the UN.
Major
Socialist.
cities underwater, unprecedented heat waves, terrifying storms, widespread water shortages, the extinction of 1 million species of plants and animals. And this is not fiction or exaggeration.
No, it's absolutely
it is
not
what
fiction,
science
guys.
tells us
This is
will
science.
result from our current energy policies.
Mm-hmm. And I can show you guys videos like this all day. You probably recognize John Kerry. Ran into him in Egypt a few years ago with a mask on his face. It was very hard to understand what he had to say. He didn't want to talk to me, surprise. But here he is on the climate emergency.
So I think, personally, we're on the brink of needing to declare a climate emergency, which is what we really have. And we need to get people to behave as if this really is a major transitional challenge to the whole planet, to everybody.
And you guys know now, emergency is the magic word, right? As soon as they say emergency, suddenly we don't have a constitution anymore. Suddenly you don't have rights anymore. Now, if it's a public health emergency, suddenly freedoms that you didn't even know were freedoms are under attack. You can't go to work. You can't go visit grandma. Well, climate change is the biggest public health emergency of our time, according to these guys.
As the WHO has long since declared, the climate crisis is now the biggest health threat facing humanity.
Oh. And again, he's not alone. I was at the UN Climate Summit just a few months ago in Baku in Azerbaijan, right on the border of Iran and Russia. And this was one of the big themes. People aren't scared enough of global warming and the sea level rising a fraction of an inch over the next 2,000 years. And so now it's also going to kill you by making your health bad. This is the Secretary General of the WHO.
The defining health challenge of our time.
Oh, climate change is the defining health challenge of our time. Okay, here's the Deputy Director of the World Health Organization. Her name is Dr. Maria Neira. Really nice lady. I almost feel bad showing you this clip, but just listen. We've heard a lot, including from the Director General of the WHO, that climate change is a public health crisis. Could you explain to us how that works and what does that mean for policy?
What that means is that climate change represents a global warming, and global warming creates perfect conditions for certain diseases transmitted by...
Okay, so give up all your freedom and pay lots of taxes, and we will keep you safe. Okay, they're openly telling you now that COVID is the model for the climate crisis. This is the World Bank. COVID-19 response could help you fight climate change. This is The Guardian, one of the biggest newspapers in the UK. Top government officials saying we need to treat the climate crisis with the same urgency as we did with COVID. Here's the cartoons they're now putting in your propaganda newspapers. Got to flatten the curve, not the COVID curve. We're now in week, 472 of flatten the curve, 2 weeks to flatten the curve. But now we got to flatten the CO2 curve. Some of you probably remember, like I learned in school back in the 90s, that carbon dioxide is actually the gas of life. We exhale about 2 pounds of it every day. But we got to flatten the curve, otherwise Mother Nature is going to be mad at you, okay? Now this guy here, again, the World Health Organization chief, it's not just about humans. It's about animals, too. How many have heard of One Health? Wow, okay. So One Health, I'll let him explain a little bit and we'll get into it, but this is the WHO's new model for dealing with health care. You don't just deal with people health care. Now you have to treat people and animals and the environment as if it was all one. That's where the One Health comes in. So it's a very collectivistic, pagan, pantheistic view of life, of the planet. But here he is.
Progress towards the Sustainable Development Goals has slowed, and the window of opportunity is narrowing. WHO is therefore very grateful for the United Arab Emirates partnership and leadership in responding to many of these threats through initiatives like the Government Accelerator Program to deliver faster impact through collaboration and innovation. I'm also very pleased that the UAE will host COP28 later this year and will make health a key part of those discussions. The climate crisis is a health crisis, and climate solutions are health solutions. Renewable energy, health.
And he goes on. But essentially this One Health thing, and you really need to look into this because this is going to affect every one of you that owns animals. It's going to affect every one of you that owns land. It's going to affect every one of you that owns water rights. It's all one. You can't deal with human health in isolation. Climate change is a public health crisis. Therefore, your animals, your land, all need to come into the equation. And they say this openly on their website. By linking humans, animals, and the environment, One Health can help address the full spectrum of disease control. Now, one thing that I thought was really interesting, they have their One Health high-level expert panel. There are more than 20 veterinarians and 4 human doctors on this thing. Interesting. Now, we are headed to a climate hell, and so I'll show you a little bit about the religious component, too, and then we'll get back to agriculture, but I want to just give you a sneak preview.
Is ticking. We are in the fight of our lives, and we are losing. Greenhouse gas emissions keep growing. Global temperatures keep rising. And our planet is fast approaching tipping points that will make climate chaos irreversible. we are on a highway to climate hell with our foot still on the accelerator.
It's like a bad AC/DC song, right? On the highway to climate hell. And of course, Joe Biden agrees, right?
We're racing forward to do our part to avert the climate hell.
Climate hell.
Secretary General.
Okay, don't worry. If you give them enough money, we can avert the climate hell. That's the spoiler alert. But what you see here is they are creating in the minds of people the idea that there's some sort of crisis, some sort of emergency, and only these global rulers can save us from this global emergency. And it's not a new strategy. They've been doing this for a long time. You might remember Barack Obama's chief of staff, Rahm Emanuel.
A serious crisis to go to waste. And what I mean by that, it's an opportunity to do things that you think you could not do before.
Yeah, it's a new opportunity to do new things, right? 200 years ago, the great French philosopher and lawmaker Frédéric Bastiat identified this tendency in totalitarians. He said they're always concocting the poison and the antidote in the same laboratory. It's exactly what they're doing here. And we'll get to a little bit of the pseudoscience in a moment because we need to understand. Now, I think a lot of people have gone back to sleep. Oh, we don't have to worry about this. Right? We just had an election, our guy, whatever. So now we don't have to worry about this anymore. So just a few years ago, I was on the Arabian Peninsula, and 7 U.S. senators showed up, 6 Democrats and a rhino. And I had the opportunity to ask them, true story, about the possibility of Donald Trump being elected and the fact that Americans don't believe the man-made global warming hypothesis. Here is what they said.
I'm here with the New American Magazine. There was a poll released several months ago. AP Nork Center for Public Affairs Research found that less than half of Americans even believe that human activity is causing climate change. About a third are willing to pay even a single additional dollar on their electric bill each month to deal with climate change. And with the very real prospect of Trump coming back to the White House in 2024, how is the U.S. government planning to make credible commitments on funding and on these other issues that you guys are talking about?
Senator Coons, who chairs that committee.
That was part of why I spoke to what I think is both the structure of the Inflation Reduction Act, which has directed tens of billions of dollars already to construction projects in predominantly red states or politically conservative states, and to the way that we've been able to get out of my subcommittee and pass through the full committee an additional $1.5 billion in investment in combating climate change, predominantly in the global south, with an overwhelming bipartisan margin. So am I suggesting that were the former president to be our next president, everything would be fine? Not at all. But I'm saying that there is a broad enough and deep enough support for continuing investments to combat climate change and for the Inflation Reduction Act and bipartisan infrastructure law in particular that we will continue. We'll continue to move forward regardless.
We don't care about your little elections. We don't care what you think. Doesn't matter. We've sent tens of billions of dollars to Republican states and Republican districts, and now they're all hooked. Now there's a constituency in every one of those districts, in every one of those states that's going to rattle on about how we have to save the climate legislation. You have it right here in South Dakota and a lot of other states that you guys represent. They've got the carbon capture pipelines coming through your land, right? All of this was carefully designed to force Republicans to heel on this issue because they know that Donald Trump has actually publicly called this a hoax that we must defeat. So they were planning to do this, and they were successful. The very next year, we went to the climate summit in Azerbaijan. 5 Republican congressmen showed up, every single one of them. For the first time that I've ever seen in my life, all 5 of them touted efforts to reduce carbon dioxide emissions as if this were a good thing. Never saw that in my life. Just a few years ago, there wasn't a single Republican that would publicly confess to believing in this hypothesis. Now they're all lining up. Why? Because there's a ton of federal tax dollars, just like you heard here, going to their districts, building solar panel plants and all the rest of it so that we can never get out of this. And of course, we're watching this now. You might have heard that in the big, beautiful bill, we're going to repeal some of this. And notice they called it the Inflation Reduction Act. Talk about deception. It's the biggest climate bill in the history of the world. That's what they said publicly at this event. I asked every single one of them on camera. If we had more time, I would have showed you. Why did you call it the Inflation Reduction Act when it's a climate bill? Oh, everybody knows it's a climate bill, said Senator Markey. Did you guys know? Most Americans didn't. Okay. Now, you can't just solve this at the national level, right? It's not just the federal government that's going to have to deal with this. This is a global problem.
Global problems require global solutions.
Very convenient. So in September, I was at UN headquarters for the UN Summit of the Future. Almost no media coverage, although the UN marketed it as one of the most important UN summits in the history of humanity. They said we're transforming the UN from UN 1.0 to UN 2.0. UN 1.0 was supposed to deal with peace and security. UN 2.0, as they said, is going to be a new system. We can't build a future for our grandchildren with a system built for our grandparents. We need a new one. And so now the UN will deal with energy and the environment and agriculture and the internet and freedom of speech and education. You name it, the UN wants to oversee it. They said we need to strengthen the UN. We need to renew our commitment to multilateralism. We need global governance. This is all in the final agreement signed by every government in the world, including yours. Okay? They said we're going to fulfill our obligation to comply with the decisions of the International Kangaroo Court of Justice. I added the kangaroo in there. Every government in the world agreed to this, and we'll come back to why this is so important in just a minute. And by the way, they're committed to strengthening international tax cooperation. And in the event of emergencies, the UN is going to take the lead role. I actually exposed this before it even happened. Back in 2023, the UN Secretary General put out a policy brief where he said, if there's a global emergency, all power and authority needs to be in the hands of the Secretary General, which is very convenient since it was written by the Secretary General. They gave a number of different examples of what a global emergency might be. Doesn't have to be global, doesn't really have to be an emergency. It could be an economic problem, an environmental problem, a climate problem, a war. It could be something in space. They didn't elaborate. It could be a black swan that we can't predict. It could be anything. But when that happens, they said, all nations, all governments, all businesses must recognize the primary role of intergovernmental organs, that's UN agencies, in decision making. Again, your government agreed to this last September and signed it without 1 in 1,000 Americans knowing anything about it. In the final agreement, they said we recognize the need for a more coherent, cooperative, coordinated, and multidimensional international response to complex global shocks and the central role of the UN in this regard. In other words, when you have a global emergency, the UN is going to lead the response. And for good measure, the agreement said we're going to strengthen the UN to respond to these global emergencies. So I asked the spokesman for the UN, the chief spokesman, nice enough guy, about all the criticism that we had seen in America. In fact, 26 U.S. governors said, we're not going to be taking orders from the UN, thank you very much. There had been a press conference on Capitol Hill saying, yeah, we're not going to be following the UN's orders. And so I asked the guy about this.
Alex Newman with the New American Media.
Yeah.
To the extent that the Summit of the Future and the Pact for the Future have been mentioned by policymakers at all in the United States, it's been very negative. We had a congressional delegation last week, had a press conference say this was an attack on our sovereignty. And last week we had 26 U.S. governors issue a statement saying that they weren't going to comply with UN dictates and mandates. Is the Secretary General concerned about public opposition, especially among Republicans in the United States?
Look, this is not, the Pact for the Future is not about world government. It's about making an organization of independent, sovereign member states work better.
It's absolutely not about world government. But we have global problems that really need world government. Listen.
Cooperative body where governments come together, sovereign governments come together to try to solve problems that impacts them all, that try to deal with problems that have no borders, right? Not one country can deal with the rising seas. Not one country can deal with global pandemics. Not one country can deal with international terrorism.
Okay. No country can do this alone. We've got to have the UN coordinate. And so let's go back to the International Kangaroo Court of Justice for a moment. The UN likes to market this as the World Supreme Court. Right? Now, they are on the verge of issuing a landmark ruling, what the UN is calling the most important judicial decision in the history of humanity. They started having hearings last year, and this case, according to the New Yorker, is putting the entire industrialized world on trial. Why? Because of your CO2 emissions. So the government that is leading the charge here, the government of Vanuatu, they are arguing, and this is from their special envoy for climate change, he says this may well be the most consequential case in the history of humanity. He says, we're looking to the court for recognition that the conduct which has already caused immense harm to my people and so many others is unlawful, that it must cease, and that its consequences must be repaired. Does anybody know what conduct he's talking about? Your life, your farm, your energy, your car, your air travel. That must cease. Okay? And they're deadly serious. Unless you think, oh, who cares what the UN court has to say, let me remind you of the power of these international courts. You guys as ranchers probably remember when the World Trade Organization demanded that the U.S. Congress stop the country of origin labeling. And what did our Congress do? Oh, yes, master. How high would you like us to jump? Okay. Right now, they have Bibi Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel, on charges of genocide. Just recently, they arrested the former president of the Philippines. I don't know anything about this guy other than he came across my desk one day and I wrote an article because he said the UN is an evil organization. We should get the Philippines out of the UN. Right now, he's sitting in a jail cell in The Hague waiting for his trial at this kangaroo court. So they're dead serious, guys. Even though you're not going to hear about it on your TV, they are deadly serious. Okay? Now, at the same time that they're doing this global court decision, and by the way, the Biden administration sent a special envoy to represent the U.S., and they demanded a strong ruling putting a stop to the climate change. So this global ruling is supposed to, in their words, clarify the obligations of states with respect to climate change. They're going to tell us what we need to do to solve climate change. Okay? An unelected group of tyrants, many of them from communist and Islamist dictatorships, are going to tell us what we need to do. And at the same time that they're doing this, they're working on the first ever global tax. Now, the one thing that has restrained the power of the United Nations all these years is the fact that it doesn't have any taxing authority. If they want money, they have to go ask governments, hey, America, hey, Trump, hey, Biden, can you guys give us some money? We want to do this new program. We want to do this new thing. And if we say no, that's the end of the story. Well, now they've got a tax in the pipeline. And guess what? It was approved in April of this year with almost no attention at all. Now, it's going to start on shipping. It's an international tax on carbon emissions from international shipping. So when you put something on a ship and send it to some other country, that ship is going to have to pay a carbon tax directly to the United Nations based on how much CO2 is being emitted. Again, it was approved already. They've got another meeting in October. It's supposed to go into effect in 2027. Every ton of CO2 emitted is going to have to pay a tax, and it's expected to raise $100 billion per year for the UN, which may not sound like much when you think about the federal budget, but think of it like the camel's nose under the tent. Right? First the nose comes under, and then before long, the whole beast is in the tent with you, spitting on you. Okay? That's what's coming, folks. Once the precedent is set that the UN can tax us, there will be no end to it. And guess what? The UN itself says shipping only makes up 3% of global emissions. If the UN can have a global tax on shipping to save us from 3% of global emissions, what do you think they can do to you? Did you know your cows contribute far more than shipping to global emissions? I told you, you have a big, giant crosshairs right on your back. Here's John Kerry making this very point.
A lot of people have no clue that agriculture contributes about 33% of all the emissions of the world.
Oh, man. Wow. No mention of the fact that it also contributes 100% of our food. Small little detail. You'd think somebody would have reminded him, but apparently not. Bill Gates of hell, same deal, right? Your cows are the problem. Forget shipping. Shipping is 3%. It's your cows. It's your power plants. It's your trucks that really need to come down.
One crucial part is agriculture, and one thing you said you were particularly surprised by was how great a problem bovine flatulence is. Do you want to explain what that is and why it's a problem?
Yeah, so the animals that can eat grass have very unusual...
We don't need to listen to Bill Gates. You guys know what he thinks, right? You're bad. He's good. Give him more money and he'll protect you. Here he is talking about they're building out digital public infrastructure where everything is going to be digitally tracked and controlled. And guess who's first in line? You guys already know.
That basic structure that starts with identity and bank accounts and payments is just foundational. And as part of this visit, I'm now seeing how that foundation is being built out in agriculture.
Oh, they're absolutely serious, folks. If they get their way, you will not be doing what you're doing in 10 years. Okay? They want us eating bugs, and they've been saying it. That's one of the things I talked about last year. They want to gene edit every single thing that you eat. And Bill Gates talked about it in 2016. You can read his article in Foreign Affairs. We already genetically engineer so many of our crops, some of our animals. Let's start genetically engineering our babies too. You know why? He understands that if he can control the intellectual property of everything we eat, he will control all of humanity. And then, of course, the 3D printed, disgusting filth masquerading as food. Okay? They're openly telling you they're going to transform the economy. That's what the whole climate thing is about. Here's the former UN czar of climate change, Cristiana Figueres from Costa Rica. She says, what we're doing here is actually changing the economy of the world. We're changing the economic model that has reigned for the last 150 years. And it's not just governments, right? They have a three-legged stool approach. Governments are the first leg of the stool, so the UN brings together all the governments. Then they signed a deal with the World Economic Forum to bring together all the businesses. And I know independent cattle producers are probably not going to be signing up anytime soon, so I'll explain their mop-up operation in a moment.
You now make a point of that's an investment criteria for you.
Well, behaviors are going to have to change, and this is one thing we're asking companies. You have to force behaviors, and at BlackRock we are forcing behaviors.
So he's on the board of the World Economic Forum and the Council on Foreign Relations. He also manages the largest single pot of money in the world, $10 trillion directly, then tens of trillions more through his supercomputer Aladdin. And they're dead serious about this. Okay. You guys might have heard about the SEC rules. They wanted everyone to start tracking their CO2 emissions. All publicly traded corporations were going to have to start tracking their CO2 emissions. And they specifically said we need farmers and ranchers to track their CO2 emissions so that we have a full picture of all the CO2 emissions upstream and downstream as we're producing this. They're fundamentally changing the economy of the world. And they are going to come after you. If you want to do business with a bigger company that does business with a publicly traded company, you're going to get caught in this net. Now, this is on pause for the time being, but rest assured they will be back. Eventually, once they get rid of cash, which they're working very diligently to do, you'll have CBDCs, which will track the carbon footprint of everything you do and everything you buy.
But very, very specific. This specific brand, even the specific batch of this. If we link that with, AI technology and then big data and particularly Internet of Things, there are ways for us to come up with instant measurement and reporting of the carbon footprint. I hope that through this we can help people to really make different choices.
Yeah, different choices. And by choices, they mean you get no choices. Okay, just to be clear. And they're very open about this. In the interest of time, we're going to skip some of it. But this money will be programmable.
If you think about the benefits of digital money, there are huge potential gains. It's not just about digital forms of physical currency. You can have programmability, units of central bank currency with expiry dates. You could have, as I argue in my book, a potentially better and some people might see it, or a darker world where the government decides that units of central bank money can be used to purchase some things, but not other things that it deems less desirable, like, say, ammunition or drugs or pornography or something of the sort.
Or steak.
And that is very...
Right? They're not messing around, folks. The IMF is talking about this programmability. Here again, the carbon footprint. This is the guy who helps run Alibaba, the biggest Amazon in the world, so in China.
Through technology, an ability for consumers to measure their own carbon footprint. What does that mean? That's where are they traveling? How are they traveling? What are they eating? What are they consuming on the platform? So, individual carbon footprint tracker.
And remember, folks, if you are in the cattle industry, you are enemy number one. 33% of emissions. You guys and the oil producers. Although the oil producers, they're already good now. They've figured out a bunch of new scams to extract more money from you and be carbon neutral friendly so that they can sell carbon credits to people and make even more money. You guys are the problem. Right? Over 98% of the governments and central banks in the world are working on central bank digital currencies as we speak. And it all really hit me. I was in Paris in 2015 for the UN Climate Summit there, and Barack Obama was celebrating that as our commitment under Paris, we were going to slash CO2 emissions by 32% over the next 10 years. I thought, wow, that's a lot. That's interesting. Then the Communist Chinese said, oh, we're going to keep increasing our CO2 emissions for the next 15 years. And they're all patting each other on the back, and yeah, we're saving the world. What? If the people behind this really believed this stuff, they would be appalled by this. Look at Communist China's CO2 emissions versus ours. Right? They're like 300% higher than ours. How can you think it's a good idea to shut down industry, shut down agriculture in the United States, and move it all to China if you really think CO2 is so bad? Every unit of economic production in China releases drastically more CO2 than it would in the United States. If you thought CO2 was bad, you'd be horrified. And yet they're posing like saviors of the world. What they're doing is they're fundamentally transforming the world. The new model is not the American model of private property, free markets, etc. It's the communist Chinese model. Klaus Schwab.
I respect China's achievements, which are tremendous over the last over 40 years since the opening up and policy and reform policy came into action. I think it's a role model for many countries.
It's a role model, right? It murdered 100 million people, not including unborn babies. Quite a role model. Right? Unbelievable. George Soros, who's put more money into our political system than virtually anybody else in the history of our country, thinks they should own the new world order. Listen.
Well, I think you need a new world order that China has to be part of the process of creating it, and they have to buy in. They have to own it the same way as, let's say, the United States owns the Washington Consensus, the current order.
All right, just so we're clear, guys, it's not about cow farts. It's not about climate change. It's not about racism. The issue is never the issue, as the communists used to say back in the 60s and 70s. The issue is always the revolution, okay? They don't care about your cows. They don't care about your CO2 footprint. They don't care about racism. Those are all pretexts to take your freedom, take your money, take your land, and take your liberty and your country. Okay, and they're very serious. We're running out of time, so we're going to have to skip a whole bunch of stuff. Now, they've been on this stuff for a long time. Back before there was global warming, there was global cooling. Some of you might be old enough to remember that, 70s, 80s, global cooling. 1977, Barack Obama's science czar, John Holdren, published a book called Eco-Science. This was back when they were still promoting the global cooling hoax. And they said that global cooling, by the way, was caused by CO2 emissions, too. That was pretty coincidental. I'm serious, right? Read the book. They said to solve this, we need a planetary regime that's going to use armed force to control all natural resources, including your land, by the way. We need forced abortions to deal with the population crisis. We need to put sterilizing agents into the water supply to make sure you don't have babies without permission from your overlords. All right there in the book. That's the guy Barack Obama thought would be a good science czar. You can read it yourself. Even before they were pushing the man-made climate hoax, they were already telling you that your private ownership of land had to go. 1971, they met in Vancouver for the Habitat 1 conference, and their final report, the Vancouver Declaration, said land cannot be treated as an ordinary asset controlled by individuals. They said private land ownership is a principal instrument of accumulation and concentration of wealth. Therefore, it contributes to social injustice. Public control of land use is therefore indispensable. Right? The issue is never the issue. It's not about your cows. It's not about cow farts. It's not about CO2. It's about taking your freedom. Okay? They're now coming after our religious organizations, and they're very open about this. One of the key organizations bringing all the religions of the world together for this, funded by the UN, funded by USAID, funded by Soros and the Rockefellers. It's called Religions for Peace. And here is their recently departed leader talking about what this means.
My name is Azza Karam, and I have the privilege and the responsibility of serving a worldwide movement of interreligious institutions, organizations called Religions for Peace. In case you do not know it, we think of it as the United Nations of Religions. The United Nations has member states or governments. Religions for Peace has member religious institutions. All
religious institutions.
Representing all
religions.
Representatives from all faith traditions.
I actually called my pastor. I was like, Seth, are we part of the UN Religions for Peace? Like, no. So they have a little trick there. You're only a legitimate religion if you join them in this crusade against the gas of life. So they're very open about the fact that they're all on board with the UN's agenda, the climate nonsense. Here's the head of the UN Environment Program talking about why your church needs to be involved in this. And they're trying to come up with a new morality. Okay. Right before the climate conference in Egypt, they released a document saying the old moral and ethical codes are no longer adequate for taking care of Mother Earth. And so we need new moral codes. We need people to make different choices, okay? As soon as I got off the plane in Sharm el-Sheikh, a big UN sign explained that your sin is actually what you did to the land and water. Not your adultery, your lying, your thieving. It's your pollution, your carbon footprint, in fact. And they actually, believe it or not, unveiled a new and supposedly improved 10 Commandments at this atrocity. They walked up to the top of Mount Sinai, all these religious leaders in partnership with the UN, and they unveiled the new 10 Commandments. Here's one of the ringleaders, CEO of the Peace Department, James Sternlich.
All religions teach us to respect the creation that we have been given. And we've done kind of a terrible job of that. And so with a new kind of 10 Commandments of climate change, which are an addendum to, not a replacement for, the original 10 Commandments, and a third covenant that we're some kind of working on between mankind and creation, that we would refocus on those elements of the teachings from across religions that point us in the direction of fixing the problems that we've created so that life can thrive on this planet and so that we can build that proverbial kingdom of heaven here on earth.
So there you heard it. All right, so the UN and Friends is bringing you not just a new and improved 10 Commandments, but also a third covenant. Right? God gave you the old covenant, God gave you the new covenant, now we got a third covenant. Okay, and if you read it, it's bonkers. Okay, we recognize human responsibility to love and protect nature. They said creation is not external. All are part of the greater whole. We must care for the planet. They said we must serve this interdependent, life-giving earth. Okay? They said that compassion means feeling the pain of the earth. Did you know that? Can you just feel Mother Earth crying? Right? But again, if you pay enough taxes to the UN, everything will be fine. Okay? The UN Climate Summit in Cancun, 2010, this was crazy. The lady, Cristiana Figueres, who we met earlier, said, we're going to open the summit in prayer. I thought, wow, this would be great. She says, all right, dear Ixchel, Mayan goddess of tapestries and creativity, please bless this summit. So I had to whip out my laptop and look up Ixchel. Turns out Ixchel was actually the goddess of cannibalism, war, and human sacrifice, which I thought was a true story. I thought that was a very appropriate way to open the summit. Even the Washington Compost picked up on this. 2012, I was down in Rio. They lit up the Jesus statue in green. The head of the UN science body actually admitted he had to resign because he was caught sexually abusing a woman. But in his resignation letter, he said, this isn't just about me saving the planet. This is my religion. Says the head of the UN climate science nonsense. And it's all based on lies, ladies and gentlemen. Again, going back to the global cooling, right? We're all going to die from global cooling. The only solution is less oil, less cattle, less CO2, and give the UN all power and authority. I could show you endless quotes from these people warning about what was going to happen. 1975, Newsweek. And I'm not picking on Newsweek. I've written for Newsweek before. But this is representative of what they were saying. The cooling world, right? We've got to have all kinds of solutions like less oil, less prosperity. And by the way, some of the more spectacular solutions, we should melt the Arctic ice cap by covering it with black soot. Thankfully, nobody was listening to them back then, but here we are, now all expected to bow down. 1991, as the Soviet Union was ostensibly collapsing, they found out they needed a new enemy so that they could keep justifying the big government, the high taxes, and all the rest of it. So the Club of Rome, Al Gore, John Kerry, Mikhail Gorbachev, a bunch of globalists and communists got together, and they determined that environment and climate would be the best idea. They said that way, the real enemy is humanity itself. Okay, it's not your cows that they're after, ladies and gentlemen. It's you and your kids and your grandkids. Now, they've been caught lying about just about everything. Almost all of their predictions have come to nothing. Okay? It's almost like God does the opposite of what they predict. It's actually really funny if you... So here, BBC, Arctic summer is ice-free by 2013. That was 2007. The ice was 50% bigger in 2013 than it was in 2007 when they wrote the article. True story. So now they've got a new one. This actually just came February of this year. Could the UK actually get colder with global warming? I mean, they think you're an idiot. Okay? They say, oh, all the scientists agree. Total baloney. I've interviewed hundreds of scientists, including a bunch who've worked for the UN. Here's Richard Lindzen, meteorology professor at MIT.
So at the latest climate conference, they came out with a document that said we needed to totally restructure the world's energy systems. They said literally trillions of dollars had to be invested in this. What are your thoughts on whether that's a good investment or not?
You know the answer to that, so why are you asking? I mean, it's a terrible investment. It's waste of money. and it's going to hurt billions of people. It's immoral.
Yes, it is. Now, here's the guy who's leading the UN's task force on sea level change, Dr. Nils Axel Morner. He died a couple years ago, but I met him on the coast of the Baltic Sea in Sweden. He's a Swedish guy, and asked him about the sea level rise. I'm from Miami. That's concerning to me.
Tell us a little bit about this whole sea level issue. I just came from the COP24 in Poland, and over again we heard that our cities are going to be flooded. I'm from Miami. They say my city's going to be flooded. Are we all doomed from sea level change to start with?
Absolutely not. I mean, there is no big rapid sea level rise going on today, and there will not be. On the contrary, if anything happens, its sea will go down a little. But
so, and again, there's so many of these. Here's Donald Trump's climate advisor, William Happer from Princeton University, professor of physics.
Does the world need carbon taxes?
No, of course the world doesn't need a carbon tax. They're talking about a CO2 tax, and CO2 is actually good for the world, so people ought to be encouraged to make more of it.
Right, amen. It's literally the gas of life, ladies and gentlemen. And actually, he goes on, he says plants were designed to live in an atmosphere with 4 to 5 times as much CO2 as we currently have. So they're lying to us in a massive way. Now, Americans don't believe this, thankfully. Less than half of Americans believe that human activity is causing climate change. Less than 1 in 3 are willing to pay a single extra dollar on their electric bill to solve the climate crisis. So people are just not buying it. And so they're going to brainwash your kids. Right? And they say this over and over and over again in their own documents. Agenda 21, the UN's agenda for the 21st century, education is indispensable for changing your kids' attitudes. It needs to include spiritual development. It needs to be integrated into everything. And it is out of control, the propaganda that your kids are facing, guys. So here's a classroom in Florida. Looks like a doomsday cult. All right.
After
Then they educate, then they write their congressman.
Of global warming is that they're given a letter for their families to sign, and this is the congressman or woman.
So letter for their congressman, right? They've got the World Core curriculum that they want taught to everybody. Now they're putting the climate change nonsense on the international standardized academic test. So all governments have to teach this nonsense. And thankfully, the pushback is growing very, very rapidly. Here is the current president of the United States just a couple years ago.
One of the most urgent tasks, not only for our movement, but for our country, is to decisively defeat the climate hysteria hoax.
Now, why would he say that? One of the most important tasks for our country is to defeat the climate hysteria hoax, because he knows, right? His first day, executive order, putting America first, got us out of all these silly UN things except the underlying treaty and much more. They have now revisited the endangerment finding. In 2009, the Obama EPA said carbon dioxide was pollution that needed to be regulated under the Clean Air Act. That will be on its way out soon. Lots of good news. They have specifically rejected and denounced the 2030 agenda. The Trump administration circulated a letter at this UN meeting where they approved the global tax on shipping, saying we are not going to comply with this, we're not going to pay it, and if we have to, we will actually impose penalties on you to get our money back. So the good news is for the next 3.5 years, we're probably going to be okay. But then we're going to have another election, and then another one, and then another one, and then some of us will die off, and our children will have been indoctrinated to believe this stuff. These people are patient, and they think over the long term. Now, on this tax, they said this is wealth redistribution under the guise of environmentalism. They're very, very serious about taking all of this. And why have you not heard about this? Well, one of the reasons is the UN actually has a partnership with Google to hide all this information. Okay, here is their UN Undersecretary General for Communications, Melissa Fleming, at the World Economic Forum.
We partnered with Google, for example. If you Google climate change, you will, at the top of your search, you will get all kinds of UN resources. We started this partnership when we were shocked to see that when we Googled climate change, we were getting incredibly distorted information right at the top. So we're becoming much more proactive. We own the science.
We own the science, okay? And we're going to force Google to tell people what we want them to hear. I actually confronted this lady at the Pact for the Future and asked her about this.
Melissa, hi, I'm Alex Newman with the New American Magazine. I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about the partnership that the UN has with Google to try to squelch disinformation and misinformation. You talked about it at the 2022 World Economic Forum.
Sorry, I'm sorry, I'm not sure who you are.
Alex.
She knows exactly who I am. And she went right over and talked to 10 other journalists, no problem. You just can't ask real questions is the problem, right? So we're so close to being out of time that I'm just going to spend our last few minutes, and I was told I had a few extra minutes because there's nobody after me, so just hear me out. But I don't want to just end on a downer, right? The reality is, folks, if we don't get serious about this, they're going to take your land, they're going to take your cows, they're going to take your kids, they're going to take your freedom, and they're going to take your country. The country that your forefathers fought and died for. That's how high the stakes are. And it's funny, it's goofy, it's ridiculous, but they're dead serious. And if we don't do something, they are going to win. I mean, unless God decides to intervene. They've got all of the cards right now. They know it's just a waiting game. So what do we do? Well, I've got my ideas. I would encourage all of you to get involved in the political process. If you can't run, find somebody you like and help them run. If you're not involved in the party machinery, get involved in the party machinery, Republican or Democrat. Who cares? We need people in both parties to stop this madness. This is a human issue. It's not a partisan issue, right? So get involved somehow. Get more involved with RCAF. I mean, what this organization is doing is amazing. You guys are like the tip of the spear in the freedom fight, and people think it's just about cows. This is so much bigger than cows and agriculture, folks. Farmers are the backbone of our freedom in this country, not just because they feed us, but because you guys appreciate the values that make this country great. So get more involved. Protect your children from the indoctrination. This has been my mission for 15 years now. I've got 6 kids. We homeschool them. I can't recommend it highly enough. Written 2 books on what they're doing to our kids, including a lot of this climate brainwashing, folks. It's coming from the UN. It's coming from the federal government. It's coming from the state government. And yes, it's even in South Dakota, believe it or not. I've got a new book that I just put out on this that goes into a lot of depth on this. I think I have maybe 10 copies in the back. I'll be out there by the JBS table afterwards. It's called Indoctrinating Our Children to Death. Government schools are waging war on faith, family, and freedom. How do we stop them? And it's been endorsed by great Americans like our Secretary of Defense and General Mike Flynn and a lot of other great Americans. If you still have your kids in a government school, seriously think and pray about other options. We use Classical Conversations. It's fantastic. I'm on the board of Freedom Project Academy, a classical K-12 online school. So many good options right now to get your kids a world-class godly education for almost no money. There's no reason why our kids should be brainwashed right now. We've got to protect them. If you're not yet a subscriber to the New American Magazine, you should be. We actually have some copies in the back. My friend Michael will hook you up if you want some. A lot on the UN's world religion. But we go every year to these climate summits, so you can find out what they're up to, what the new plan is. You can get my newsletter for free at libertysentinel.org. I would encourage you to talk to Michael out in the back about the John Birch Society. This organization has been fighting these battles for literally more than 60 years now. I truly believe we would have lost our freedom already if it wasn't for the work of these men and women all across the country. It's named after a missionary who joined military intelligence and then was murdered by communist Chinese after World War II. Great, great group. So talk to Michael about that. We still have our Constitution in this country. And all the tools we need are in the Constitution. The vast majority of the craziness that's coming at us from the federal level is unconstitutional. So if we could get the federal government to obey the Constitution, a lot of these problems would disappear almost like magic. Right? When the federal government insists on doing unconstitutional things, we have our state governments to protect us, to stand in the gap. My governor in Florida, Ron DeSantis, during the COVID stuff, he actually told Joe Biden to his face on national TV, I'm standing in the way. You're not doing that to the people of my state. You're not forcing their kids to wear masks. You're not forcing them to take injections that they don't want. It's not happening in my state. We can do the same thing when they come after our cows, when they come after our power plants, all of it, and we must. Okay. So this is firmly in line with the biblical tradition, the doctrine of the lesser magistrates. We've got a great bill in both houses of Congress right now, actually, called the Defund Act that would get the United States out of the United Nations. It's in the House and in the Senate. Senator Mike Lee sponsored that. And then when we're all done appealing to human authorities, we go to the ultimate authority, the creator of the heavens and the earth, like our forefathers did. This was actually one of the flags that they flew. They appealed to heaven. We need to do that again. Folks, don't worry about the climate. The climate can take care of itself, right? God actually told us heaven and earth will pass away, but his words will not. We know that the earth will burn up, and it won't be because of your cows or your SUV. True religion doesn't involve saving the climate from CO2. It involves taking care of widows and orphans and keeping oneself unstained from the world. So folks, 3,000 years ago, David talked about the kings of the earth taking their stand, the rulers conspiring together against the Lord and against his anointed one. You can imagine God was probably just terrified. No, actually in verse 4 we find out that the one enthroned in heaven laughs. The Lord ridicules them. God actually thinks these people are funny. Okay. Yeah, he really does. And so I think we should laugh a little bit with it. It's a spiritual battle, folks, but ultimately here is how it's all going to go down. Right? After laughing at them, God is going to speak to them in his wrath, and you absolutely don't want to be on the wrong side of that. Thank you guys so much, and God bless you.